welcome to another broadcast of the Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst radio network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Pick them up at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Please use DJ at ArtistFirst.com. And now, your hosts, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you very much, Scott. It was like a long pause there. I was worried. Your host? But I'm Michael Lyons.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Margaret.
That's the end of the show.
All righty.
We're done.
We're done?
No, that would be a reason without a cause.
Ah, I see. Not a cause without a reason.
Not a cause without a reason. Well, we are here tonight to talk about causes and effects in some regard.
Well, yes. It's more along the lines of reflections.
Oh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's clean this up a little bit because we started a little bit oddly. So tonight's show is going to be it's going to be an interesting show in my opinion because, lately and actually in one of our more recent shows we were talking about, the fact that there's a quantum component to consciousness, and in fact, no less a luminary than Sir Roger Penrose and his collaboration with the anesthesiologist whose name escapes me at the moment, unless you remember it. But in his collaboration, they are exploring and have been exploring really basically for the last decade the connection of consciousness and the quantum, let's say, component of consciousness. So that we're not going to go into that tonight. You can go back and listen to that show, and it's a good one. But tonight we're going to explore a little bit more about, in essence, our place, and by our I mean all of us, human beings in the universe, our place in the universe. And in one way, we're going to hearken back to science. And really the age of enlightenment, which is also known as the Renaissance, and even maybe a little bit before that. The problem, one of the first and maybe most famous, one of the first and most famous persons who observed this phenomenon, that the universe is able to yield to reason. It's able to provide. We're able to perceive and understand the underlying truths of the universe by applying our reason to it. Was Sir Isaac Newton, and many others of his ilk in sort of the explosion of the scientific method and the mathematical analysis of the universe. And of course, he relied upon a lot of prior work done by the Greeks and by the Egyptians, by others. But Newton, in his Principia Mathematica, really dove very deep. He was of course, one of the foremost geniuses of his time, and he really dove very deeply into the underlying principles as revealed through mathematics. And the insight that he had was that the universe can be abstracted, and that certain fundamental principles, his Principia, can be perceived and then proved and become, in essence, some fundamental properties of the universe that could be understood through the pure application of human reason. So, he talked about the planetary motion, and he talked about all kinds of things. He had an understanding of gravity, which was further refined in our modern day multiple times. But one of the other insights that Newton had was that the universe in yielding to reason, revealed in essence the essence of its creator, of it, the fact that it was not a chaotic, random thing. Of course, there are things within the universe which are chaotic by their very nature. But even those things, and we've done this now for the last 400 or 500 years since Newton, even those things, when you get down to the fundamental nature of chaos, you find order. And order presupposes in many ways an ordering principle or an ordering entity. And so it was a leap of insight that Newton had, is that in fact the way that we are able to use reason to understand the causality of the universe, that this gets that, it's something we kind of understand at a sort of intuitive level. You know, if you push something off a desk, it falls. But Newton went much, much deeper and tried to understand why. Why does it fall? You know, what is this magical principle that two things, you bring them together and there's some sort of a repulsion or an attraction, or that somehow an object, when it is released, will fall towards another object? What is, you know, when he looked at that and applied his really incredible insight and genius to it, he said, why? And the fact that he could arrive at a satisfactory why led him to the fact that something has to be ordering this at a fundamental level, and to a deeper understanding, in essence, of source, or of God, or of just the primary consciousness of the universe. So fast forward maybe 300 years, and our quote tonight is from Uncle Albert, who had a I would say a similar, if not equal level of genius to Newton, as certainly someone who fundamentally changed the way that humankind understands the universe, and did it on the shoulders of giants like Newton, but yet extended it even further, and came up to almost the same exact insight. And Einstein's quote is really illustrative. Do you want to essay it?
Sure. That deep emotional conviction of the presence of a superior reasoning power, which is revealed in the incomprehensible universe, forms my idea of God. Albert Einstein.
And Einstein, he had a very sort of of course he was religiously, fundamentally Jewish, but he was mostly secular, a secular Jew, if you will. However, through his scientific and very rigorous inquiry into plumbing the depths of the universe, through both special relativity and general relativity, and then into quantum physics, at least the beginnings of it, he understood that what appeared to be random chaos could not be, and he was quite sort of unhappy, if you will. He and Dirac and many others were unhappy with the sort of uncertainty that was revealed in quantum mechanics, because he said, God, his other famous quote, God does not play dice.
Right. He's basically saying that random developments are not enough to keep this universe together.
Yeah, well, and also that if you have a truly chaotic universe, it would be completely unyielding to reason, because you could say, well, that this event doesn't always produce this result, and in a causal universe, event A produces result B, and it's calculable out to the level of precision that you want to spend calculating it, right? And we apply that principle to look all the way back to the Big Bang, you say, well, okay, if you have these principles and you run them backwards, it comes all the way down to the singularity. If you have these principles and you run the universe forwards, you can predict to the degree of precision that you can run your calculations exactly where the moon is going to be, or where the sun is going to be, or where a particular body that's moving in space is going to be. And you can then take a rocket and, guide it using these exact same principles of motion, and you can rendezvous with this object to the tenth of a second. You say, well, you start here and you move this way and you follow this bit of curved space-time, and bam, there you are. You found this other piece of matter, also moving through these same curved pathways in space-time. So Einstein's, again, whacked up against, if you will, this fundamental underlying reason which is attached to the most basic principles of the universe. At its fundamental core, at its most basic principles, it reveals a mystery that this cannot have arisen from pure chaos. Pure chaos is at the lowest energy state of the system. When you take a system and you let it cool off, if you take a glass of hot water and let it cool off, that system is going to a lower energy state and becoming, as it does so, more chaotic. And the universe is moving towards a chaotic state, but it started in a very highly ordered state, in fact, where everything was in one single point. That's about as ordered as it gets, And then it's moving towards a lower energy state, but that primary ordered state and the causality of it, that one thing leads to another, even if we don't understand. Einstein says it's the incomprehensible universe because we are limited in our perceptions and we're limited in our understanding, and we're using, interestingly enough, our reason as a reflection of source applied to this universe, and we find answers. This shows that the mystery of the universe has answers, if you know what I mean. If there's information and you can extract it through reason, that means that the information is already there. You're not creating the universe as you think about it. You're revealing the universe as you reason your way through it.
Well, it goes back to that description, I think, that we had discussed with not Penrose, the physicist, where basically he's looking at a chess game and you're trying to define the rules of the game by just observing the movements of the pieces on the board.
That's Feynman.
Feynman, thank you.
Yeah.
That was Feynman.
Another genius.
Mm-hmm. And if you realize that most of science does it this way, okay, it's an outward observation that allows for that level of predictability, that you can say, okay, well, it's been doing this kind of orbit all this time. That means that according to everything we've observed, it should be over here. If you fast forward 1,000 years, we should find it here. It's a description. Doesn't necessarily mean that you understand why it's happening, but you can have a simulation of its movement. And when you begin to realize that there are levels of understanding that humans do for their world, this is this particular interaction between the observer and the observed. Seeing that, again, you are in this conceptual realm. This is a mental realm. This is not an experiential realm. And what I find fascinating is that sometimes people conflate the two. They They don't think there's anything different between an experience and what they think should happen.
Well, that's true. That's another way of going at this. But if you so let's back up a little bit. So when we in this experiential incarnation, we are, and we know this from many different modalities, but our reflections of, or emanations, as Tolle likes to say, emanations of Source. We have within ourselves the spark of consciousness as beings, and we have also as tools, and these things are the things that people start to conflate, the ability to think, to reason. So reasoning, through the agency of the ego, it sometimes takes the place of being, or tries to take the place of being. And the emotion, the deep emotional conviction that Einstein refers to in his quote, is something that if you even talk to any person who has no particular scientific training and ask them, do you feel that the universe is a place that was created, that it didn't just arise from nothing? They say, yeah, that feels right to me. Whether or not they can discuss it, whether or not they can find any underlying proofs of that, or even refute it, is sort of immaterial. There's sort of an emotional connection to the fact that within the universe, what we see doesn't appear that it could have arisen from just pure chaos. Now, there are those who think differently, but there's an emotional connection to that concept. And then there's the reason itself, driven by that emotional connection, applying reason, and from that teasing out the most subtle details, observation, the scientific method, hypothesis, and attempt to disprove or prove your hypothesis, support it or refute it, and following that rigorously, following it so that you are honest with yourself, that you're an honest broker. You say, well, I thought it was this. I tried this idea. The idea didn't work out. You abandon the idea and you move on. That whole process, which evolved from this application of reason, sort of the rules, the process of application of reason, has yielded such incredibly good results, such results that our scientific knowledge has led us to very incredibly subtle measurements that bear out these very, very, very fundamental laws that we've kind of teased out of the universe. Still and all has not refuted that initial emotional conviction that, when we do this, the farthest down we can go, the most subtle thought that we have, if we prove it all the way out, you find that, yeah, it really makes sense. And that's the thing that when you say to somebody, the universe makes sense at a fundamental level, what you're really saying is that it's not just a non-causal, chaotic, random thing. Because one of the fundamental things that's an aspect of chaos is it doesn't make sense. It means that whatever is happening right now has no bearing on what happens next. and yet we know that that's not true. Yes, things can appear to be random. They can appear to have an event can appear on the horizon of your experience, and it appears to come out of nowhere. Wow, how did that happen? But in fact, you can, with enough knowledge, find out exactly why something happened. And if you follow that path down, you're never disappointed in trying to come to the root cause of an event. You will be able to find that. And that reveals something much, much deeper.
Well, that goes back to the question of why is it possible for us to even begin to understand the universe?
Exactly.
What is it that's in us that makes that idea plausible in our heads? And it has a lot to do with, as I was saying before in the beginning, it's a reflection. We are reflections of something greater. And that spark of consciousness that we have is not the huge consciousness or the divine or the consciousness. It's a spark of consciousness. So you understand that we are a limited reflection of something that was there before even time existed. Because time, again, is a concept. And we take it for granted, truthfully. I mean, if you think, how do we handle time? We say, we have a schedule. It's by this particular number. It's got to be done by here, or we're having a meeting there. It's a description that we are moving along with. We set our calendars accordingly that way. But what is it exactly? And you can't really explain time. Most people do it by saying, well, what are you talking about? We always do it this way.
Right. This is the sequence of events.
This is how, and it's like, well, what is that?
Right.
And they look like, wait, I haven't even thought of anything past the fact that I've got to be at work by 8.
Right. And speaking of Einstein, his special relativity and general relativity, but special relativity literally destroyed the concept of a universal time. There's really your time and my time, and those two times sort of agree.
Yes, relativity.
Right.
Relative to something. It's not the entire universe is working on one single time clock.
One single time clock. In fact, this is something which has been discussed quite a lot, but it's still fundamentally fascinating to something that we rely upon now every day, which is the GPS system, the global positioning system. You rely upon it every day if you're using a navigation app to tell you where you are and how you're going to get there and when you're going to get there. Well, it is a basic fact of this universe that and down to as precise a measurement of time, 1 second to the next, and the elapsed time that occurs, as precise a measurement of time as we are able to do. Atomic clocks, and better than that, they're now timing these things using the vibrations of the cesium atom, and that's at a quantum level. So we're down into the how many Planck times between this vibrations of the cesium atom that we can calculate. At that level, the GPS system doesn't work unless you take into account the fact that a satellite orbiting above the Earth, which is where those GPS signals come from, and where they have to broadcast down to the Earth so that we know where we are, that satellite has a different clock, subtly different, but significant enough that if you didn't take into account that a satellite orbiting at whatever it is, 20,000 feet above the Earth, has a different clock based on special relativity, that part of space-time is fundamentally moving at a different speed of space and time than we are here sitting on the planet, because we're inside of a gravity well, and that's a little bit further away from this big fat planet that we sit on. Just that much, really, based on the universe, an incredibly short distance makes enough of a difference in time that we have to take into account, or you wouldn't end up at Aunt Mary's house. You'd end up, in downtown Manhattan. So,
okay, what he's trying to say.
What am I trying to say?
Simply, is that the rate of time close to the Earth is different than the rate of time of a satellite. So in order for you to be able to coordinate that so you can get your instructions on your GPS to arrive at your destination at a certain time for you, that must be taken into account, that difference. And it's this has proven Einstein's theory because it's repeatable over and over again.
Right. You get to Aunt Mary's house every time.
Right.
You
But
know?
this is such an amazing development in how we operate here on this earth that most people don't even think about it. Oh, it's science. Somebody must be taking care of that. It's like, think about it. There's different times according to where you happen to be
on the planet.
Right, on the planet. It's not time zones. We're talking rates of time, which is different than time zones.
You're literally, okay, so where we are on Earth, we're literally aging slower than if you were flying a plane from here to Los Angeles, from the East Coast to the West Coast. When you get up in a plane and you fly to Los Angeles, you're aging slightly more quickly.
Yes, you age faster the further away you are from the planet, which means that the jet setters are aging faster than...
Now, it's incredibly small and insignificant, but that difference is calculable and provable, and it says it's something extremely fundamental, is that both space and time are not constants. They are variables in this universe. And our understanding of that leads us to even more subtle and more fundamental principles. However, to get there requires the application of reason, observation, reason, and then the extraction of this information into a theory, and then the testing of that theory until it becomes at least a set of operating facts. All of that reveals a very fundamental underlying primary source of that of those rules. Let's talk about rules. We talked a little bit about the rules of a system with Penrose and that whole show that we did on quantum consciousness, because one of the things that he was also talking about in that lecture was the fact it was called the Gödel's uncertainty principle. Is it Gödel?
I thought
Gödel's uncertainty principle, or rather incompleteness theorem. And that sounds sort of scary and mathematical, but at the end of the day, what it really says is that let's talk about the universe or even anywhere on Earth. Your current environment has certain rules, and this goes back to what Margaret was talking about with Feynman. We understand some of the rules because we're looking at the chess pieces on the board and seeing how they move, and we're saying, this piece moves this way and this piece moves that way, and then there might be some sort of underlying fundamental rule. Well, this color piece of this particular shape only moves on diagonals. Well, that's a fun new thing that we've now figured out, that this is a more subtle and more general property. And then we can see that the other rules were just kind of developments or implications of this underlying rule. Okay. So the incompleteness hypothesis, Gödel's incompleteness theorem, says that you're going to get in any system, in any environment that you want to look at, looking at the chessboard or whatever it is, you're going to get to the point where you understand all the rules, but yet you won't understand how the game occurred. Yes, you've got it all the way down. You've got it all the way down to the fundamental principles, but where did the principles come from? There's something outside of the game that made the rules for the game.
Right.
And then everything else in the game applies from the rules. But when you suss it all the way out and you get all the absolute rules of chess, so that you understand why when a lowly electron moves all the way to the other side of the board, it suddenly becomes a queen. Oh my God, what the heck happened there? Well, yeah, there's a rule about that. And it happens every time. But where did the information that makes the rule come from? So that's what Gödel, I have a problem with that. That's what he came up with. He said, well, yes, I can understand all the rules of chess, but I don't know where the rules came from.
Right.
And you just saying that somebody made them up and you just have to accept them on faith, it starts to get a little mystical. You say, well, okay, we have to accept on faith that electrons just have this mass, or that protons decay in this many years. And you say to yourself, well, that seems to be true all the time, but why? And if you get to the why of why the electron has this particular mass, you go, well, it doesn't seem to have a reason, but yet it has to have a reason, because without that, everything else falls apart.
What I find fascinating is that most people are not thinking in terms of understanding that in full. In other words, when you were learning how to write English, and they basically told you have to answer these questions: who, what, where, why, how. All right? Science is great on the how. And the where is like defining where space is and the nature of time. The who, the what, the why. Those three are the biggest questions humanity asks itself of creation. And those questions alone point to the fact that your intellect is capable of asking these questions. Is there any other animal that asks these questions? I don't think so.
Don't think so.
They may be there are intelligent animals here, beings, etc. We haven't gotten into real conversations with them about existential problems.
And maybe they do think about it.
And maybe they do think about it within, like dolphins. I'm thinking dolphins probably have a good communication.
Yes.
Octopus.
Octopi, yes.
But understanding that there is something within us that does ask these questions. And here's a question for that. Why do we do that?
Right.
Why?
I think the fundamental question is why. That's what when human beings look out into the universe, the fundamental question is why. And so we pursue why all the way down. And as I said, we get all the way down to the, in mathematics or in any system, but mathematics, there's something where you get all the way down to the root of a particular equation or something, and it says, here is the unprovable assertion. This is true. And if you say to your math teacher, why, they say, because. because we have to assume this. And from this, everything else kind of falls out. And if you stare at it and you say to yourself, why, you're literally recreating the incompleteness theorem in your head. Because that's what Gödel said. He said, why? Why are these principles unprovable? And if we say that everything else works, as long as we don't question the unprovable principles, where do the principles come from? You go back to Newton again. The Principia Mathematica was all derived from some basic assumptions, one or two basic assumptions. Everything else fell out of that. But without the basic, this is true. Why? Shut up. It's just true. Okay.
Well, it's very, very interesting that we as human beings can do that.
Mm-hmm.
We can just say, let's assume.
Yes.
Let's pretend.
Yes.
We're really good at pretending, by the way. Do you know that? We have the gift of being able to project forward or backwards, to analyze something, to draw conclusions from that, or perhaps look at it and say, okay, I'm not seeing it fully. What do I need to look at? But the fact that you can do that, where you can just make an assumption, and then you'll find that things still work according to everything that you've observed, but you have this one crazy assumption out in left field here that it still works. But what universe is this describing? You know, it's like imaginary numbers. Imaginary numbers are an interesting field where it's the square root of a negative number is equal to I. Imaginary. Because you can never get the square root of a negative number, ever.
But somebody said, if we assume that,
yes,
what happens? And suddenly you had a whole beautiful branch of mathematics, which, by the way, beautifully described the actual universe.
Well,
using an imaginary thing.
It beautifully describes a lot of the electrical connections, problems, phenomena.
Yep.
In other words, you wouldn't be able to have like circuits
or radio
or any of that,
or lasers,
without making that assumption, and then suddenly it actually is describing something that is observable in this universe. Isn't that fascinating?
And the interesting thing about that is you have to assume, okay, there's a rule in what we call real numbers. And the rule is, this is a rule, one of these unprovable axiomatic rules, that when you multiply a number by itself, the number you get is always positive, right? That's a rule. You say, well, if I take -5 times -5, I get positive 25. That's great. Everyone says, yes, that works great. And we wrote a whole description of rules in mathematics, and everything was working great. And then all of a sudden we ran into something we didn't understand. And somebody said, puzzle, this doesn't work. Let's do something. Let's just say, we'll just break one tiny little rule. We'll say that this number, when you multiply it by itself, stays negative. This number times this number equals -1. And you go, okay, first of all, that's crazy town, but let's just try it just to see what happens. And all of a sudden, wow, the whole problem falls apart, and it has a solution. And guess what? We tried out the solution and it works. And everyone went, yay! And then somebody in the back of the room says, but negative numbers can't be squared. And then everyone else said, shut up! This works! So we are, as our superpower, Margaret just said it, we able to take something which actually doesn't work.
Or shouldn't
work.
Okay. It's not that it doesn't work. It shouldn't work according to everything that we think we know.
Right. But instead of saying, well, we can never look there because that doesn't work, we say, well
what if?
What if? Just for the sake of just close your eyes and wish really hard and say negative numbers actually can be square rooted and squared back to themselves. Okay. All right. Well, it sounds crazy town, but we're going to try it. Let's see what happens. And then we would do all the math. And say, wow, this kind of works. Do it again. Still works. Still works. And look, this whole problem over here that we couldn't solve, that one works too. And you go, gee.
Mm-hmm.
And we say, okay, we're going to break one rule, and we're going to follow it all the way out and see what happens. So what that means is that rule wasn't as much of a rule as we thought it was. It's like a rule on the chessboard. Yes, all of a sudden we found that if you move this over here, it flips sideways, and goes off to that infinity. And guess what? Everything else works that way. And it all comes down into actual real things.
Turns out to be a doorway.
A doorway.
Where you can begin to investigate a whole different level of interactions that you never thought would ever exist. And frankly, we wouldn't have used that until we really took steps into currents and electricity. So it's really fascinating. So my question is, did that arise as a result of observing what electricity does? Or did we need that before we could even understand and handle electricity? Which came first?
Yeah, a lot of these are chicken and egg problems. And the interesting thing about them is we discover a part of the universe which was always there, using something out of our imagination and creating, let's say, what we think is a rule. We say, we had all these rules aren't quite working. Let's create a new rule, which actually doesn't make sense if we kept the old rules. We have to kind of bend the rules. But we see that the universe already had that bend in it.
It's thinking outside the acceptable box. So once you look at it and realize that, you know what, this is a great framework by which we will be able to build things and try other things, but suddenly you have a problem. And what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. So when you realize you have to go from point A to point B, and it can't be done strictly by the acceptable descriptions, you realize that, okay, wait, let's think outside of this box for a bit. And will we be able, well, you don't even think of will we be able, you just think of, well, how do we solve this problem? And as human beings, we have that capacity to still that inner clamor, the accepted rules voice in the head. You have to still that in order to take steps into something outside of that box. And as human beings, being able to still that acceptable rules voice in the head, to still that and expand what you are looking at, because when you are observing something through the acceptable rules, you have very defined boundaries or a very defined lens that you're looking through. But when you take that lens off and suddenly, okay, let's pretend. What do I actually see?
And pretending is, that is the mental faculty used in the proper way.
Yes.
And you say, well, we often eschew the mental because the mental likes to conflate thought with identity. But what it's really there for is to say, as a part of your consciousness which is able to reason, which is able to look and say, this gets that, and also make these sort of intuitive leaps. What if, Margaret just said it, what if we bent that rule? The incompleteness theorem is another way of saying that there is a mystery underlying what we already understand. So the rules come from somewhere, and we may not have all the rules yet. We've been looking at the game for a long time and watching people play it or watching it being played. We're looking at the universe for a long time and watching and observing what happens. And we think we've got it all kind of figured out. But then some wild hair comes in. And like right now we're looking at the JWST, and the James Webb Space Telescope is revealing things about the nature of the universe, the very, very early universe, a few hundreds of thousands of years after the creation event, the Big Bang. And excuse me, the JWST is creating, let's say, challenges to some of the accepted rules. Well, that's an opportunity to say, well, maybe the rules we had are good all the way out until you get about 300,000 years away from the Big Bang, and then they're not good anymore. Or maybe the rules we had are great, but there's another rule, a more fundamental rule, or a rule that only applies during this time, or it's whatever those things are. You say to yourself, okay, there's a new fact, a new observation. We ran it through the rules, and it doesn't seem to fit. Well, you don't throw away the observation. Your mental faculty says, your ego would say, if you're identifying, you would say, oh no, that observation has to be wrong because it breaks our rules. The proper use of the mental faculties is to say, well, maybe we just didn't understand all the rules, or maybe this is a new rule, or maybe this is something that has to fundamentally change everything we thought was correct up to this point, because we only thought it was correct. We don't know it's correct.
Well, it's what that huge change in physics had come about. And we had Newtonian physics. And then suddenly you get Einstein coming in.
Einsteinian physics.
And you get Einsteinian physics. But to understand that it goes along that way, to accept that it does go along that way. And scientists love to argue. They do.
People love to argue.
They will have a point that they want to make, and until they are proven otherwise, they're going to hang on to that point till ad infinitum or ad nauseum, choose. And it's the nature of that mind. Maybe that's the best way to term it. If a mind is made up, it's very difficult to change it, even if you have facts to go with it. The scientific community, in the sense of true science, is willing to give up that point that they're hanging on to with, for dear life. They're willing to give it up if it's proven wrong. And that is a wonderful thing. Okay, but they will fight their point. It's when you get into the other vein where, well, it doesn't matter what reason you may give or possibility that perhaps maybe you haven't taken something into account. They say, no, this is where I stand. That is a very limited way of interacting with your world, because you have no room for freedom of movement for your mind. It means you set rigidity as part of your baseline experience for yourself interacting with this world. That rigidity is something that can literally not only depress you, but wind up just making things really bad for you.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting if you extrapolate just a little bit there. The egoic identification with your theories, and if you try to hold fast to them, the universe will fight that. Will say, well, no, the actual thing is this, and then the ego rises up and says, no, I want to deny the existence of the universe, deny reality, because it feels good to have this egoic identity. And so the universe fights the ego at that level, and this is something, again, sort of totally, he calls it the isness of now, which is a lovely little expression, but in essence it really says is that whatever our perceptions of reality are, once you involve the ego, once you've now taken your observations and saying, this is all that there is, I know, I'm blocking out everything else, la, 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 stick my fingers in my ears, no new facts will be considered. We have all the facts. We understand everything. When the universe then comes in and shows you that not only are you wrong, but that your assumptions and your ego are going to, as Margaret said, make it very bad for you when this new actual isness of now arrives. The only proper response there is to do as you would with any situation from reality. You have to accept that this is what it is. The moment of now has revealed to you a new rule, or that your old rule wasn't complete. And then the proper use of the mental faculty is to say, why? Well, why is that new fact? Not argue against it, not say it can't be, I don't want to, I'm not going to pay attention. No. Why? Why is all of this working and then this thing doesn't work? And then you get these incredible insights like, let's try, to reiterate, let's try the square root of a negative number and see what happens. Well, wow, we found out that that's a good way to approach this thing. Now, again, we then have a whole new paradigm. Everything lines up. It's all good. We go from Newtonian to Einsteinian, and then Einsteinian to quantum, and then quantum to who knows what next, superstrings or supersymmetry, or go pick your theory. All of those things approximate and approach what is the actual isness of now through the mental faculty, through teasing out these underlying rules, but yet none of them get to the actual basic truth. The underlying ground truth is that somewhere there came the rules. And even the ones we haven't found out yet are still rules. They're still in there somewhere. And when we finally get down to the last rule, Einstein said it perhaps best. He says, we reveal the mind of God. He said very, very succinctly, he said, when I finally get down to the root of this problem, I will see the mind of God. Now, that maybe sounds presumptuous, but what he was really trying to say is that below it all, in Gödel's incompleteness theorem, below it all, some entity, some source, some primary mover, at least maybe there's only one rule, but that rule, that primary fact is what it all depends upon. And if we grasp that, once we grasp that, if you can't say to yourself, can I make a new rule underneath even that one? Then that one is the fundamental one. And maybe it's only one, and maybe it's many. But the point is those are the fundamental ones. And then where did they come from? Well, and that's where you end up at the mind of God.
No, I do remember reading that there are a number of scientists who basically say they are looking to see if they can understand the mind of God. And I always thought that was a rather noble endeavor. Because they weren't saying they're God, but they would like to understand the mind of God because it is so amazingly beautiful. And the one thing that you will always find with mathematicians, they appreciate the beauty and the simplicity of an equation. Now, that sounds weird for a lot of people, but it's describing a beauty, a way that these forms are coming together and expressing themselves. And you see it on paper, and then you see it manifested out in the outer world, describing movements of things that you can't put your hands on, intangible, but you see the results of it. And this is how they see the mind of God. They may not understand it, but they will go about searching for it. This is their way of searching, which I find absolutely wonderful, because we're all searching, and we all search in our own way, whether it's science or artistry. When an artist is endeavoring to do an internal expression, they're endeavoring to touch that eternal point within them. And you know when a piece is inspired because it lights up something inside of you the minute you see it or comprehend it or hear it. Music is another one. Mm-hmm. You just know that it brings you to a whole different place within yourself that you don't have words for. Or for the mathematician, you can only describe this with equations. Mm-hmm. Or, again, for an artist, you can only describe it according to the quality of the image that they have produced on a two-dimensional form.
Whatever medium.
Whatever the medium may be, or painting, or sketching, or photography. But what happens is that image touches something inside of you, and it's that eternal spark. And you go, and you can't describe it. But that's the foundation of who we are as human beings. People get used to arguing about superficial details, the outward forms, but when you understand that it is the experience that we're here for, the ability to touch that spark in another human's heart, in another human's soul, and you just look at each other and realize, yeah, I'm there. And it's just an amazing thing to be there.
And there is their source. When you're there, when you're in that communication which is wordless, you're below the rules.
You're above the rules. You've transcended the rules.
You've transcended the rules, but you're at the point where the rules are made. You're at the point where you aren't proving things anymore. You aren't sussing things out anymore. It's not the mechanism of putting things on paper or writing the words of a sonnet or whatever it may be. No, you've touched something fundamental, eternal, as well as instantaneously now and eternally now, and you're now outside or beyond the rules. Mm-hmm. But that's still consciousness. See, consciousness can operate there. Consciousness can take an assumption and run with it. Right. Well, how does it do that? If it's truly all deterministic, then you can't get outside the rules. The only way consciousness works, and this is again what Penrose was saying, is it has to be outside the rules, outside the framework, outside the universe, to appreciate and apprehend it, even in a quantum sense.
Right.
That the perception is outside.
Right. And
I think we've reached the outside.
Yes, we have reached the end of our hour.
Yes, we have.
So I'm Margaret.
And I'm Michael.
And thank you for listening.